Hey, everybody. Welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Dasugian. Happy Lunar New Year. Today on the show, why a crying horse has become a symbol of China's economic outlook. Up first, though, the U.S. and Iran met in Geneva, Switzerland today for a second round of nuclear talks. Both sides saying progress was made, but they stopped short of announcing any kind of agreement. That is the official readout. But despite the outward optimism, both sides have been ramping up their military pressure. As these talks started, Iranian state media reported that parts of the Strait of Hormuz were being closed so they can conduct military drills in the crucial commercial shipping lanes. And President Trump has been increasing U.S. military presence in the region and warning of a potential strike. So where do these negotiations stand? For that, I want to bring in NBC News digital international editor and reporter Babak Deron-Pichet. Welcome, Babak.
Thank you.
A U.S. official told NBC News, quote, progress was made, but there are still a lot of details to discuss. When these discussions first began, we were all scratching our heads saying, what are they even discussing? What are they negotiating? So what are the points now on the table, and what do they have to firm up if they can firm anything up?
Right. Well, I mean, that's the huge thing that's missing out of the conversation or being able to examine these talks right now is like, what exactly are they talking about? Arakchi, the foreign minister of Iran, also came out and said the talks were serious, that the talks were positive, probably even said, they cited some progress in the talks. But on what exactly, it's not clear. The key issues that are the sticking points are enrichment. The Trump administration and Trump himself has come out and said he wants zero enrichment. The Iranians have said that's a red line. That's not going to happen. The missile program is something that's also been mentioned that's potentially up for negotiation. The Iranians, again, have said that's not something that they're going to negotiate on.
They're wanting Iran to completely disarm, essentially.
They are. And, it should be kept in mind that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was in D.C. last week. And it seems like from, details that have leaked out of what he may have discussed with Trump is that the missiles were one of the key points that he really wanted Trump to push on. That really part of these negotiations need to focus on the ballistic missiles because that's what primarily Iran used to attack Israel in the war last June.
What is your sense as to these negotiations? Are these happening in good faith, or are they just a precursor to potential war?
That's also hard to say. I mean, from the Iranian side, they feel like they got duped during the last round of negotiations. They were in the middle of negotiations with the U.S. when the Israelis attacked last June. So they're fearing the same, that these talks are basically just a smokescreen, a cover, as the U.S. military is moving a lot of military assets. There's one warship already in the region, another one, aircraft carrier headed that way. So they're kind of paranoid about that. They were talking and got attacked, so they're fearing the same thing right now.
Let's talk about military posturing, and let's talk about Iran's perspective first. So I mentioned as I came to you that they're shutting down the Strait of Hormuz temporarily for military exercises, as Iran puts it. They have also gone on to say that they will shut down wholly the Strait of Hormuz, which is a crucial trading waterway, if in fact they are attacked. What does that signal to you as to where Iran is thinking militarily right now?
It is the highest level of military posturing, exactly like you said. The Iranians have said repeatedly over the years that if they are attacked in a very serious way where they feel the regime is threatened, they will close the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil passes through there, so they could seriously disrupt global markets by doing that. We know that President Trump does keep an eye on those kind of things, how steady the U.S. economy is. If Iran does do that, does disrupt or close the oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, that's definitely going to play a factor in any sort of conflict. And as you mentioned, the Revolutionary Guards, the most powerful military force in Iran, they carried out military drills yesterday. They also did today. Khamenei also came out and said in a speech today that I think the exact quote was, while warships are strong, the weapons that can sink them are even stronger.
I think the posture in which Iran, though, finds itself now versus where they found themselves, 8 months ago is a little bit different in that the world kind of saw what Iran didn't have during the 12-day war with Israel. right? The defenses
Right,
that they did
right.
not have and the offenses that they did not have.
Definitely.
And they kind of, tried to champion their own military might, but they didn't necessarily follow through on that.
There was a lot of tough talk that they didn't follow through on.
Yeah.
The Israelis essentially dismantled a lot of their abilities to fight back against any sort of aerial attack. It remains to be seen whether they've been able to rebuild that. They do talk tough and say that they can stand up to the U.S. and Israeli military again, but that doesn't seem realistic at this point.
So let's talk U.S. military posturing. I want to play for you what the president said on Air Force One on Monday about making a potential deal with Iran.
I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal.
So the president is talking about how he believes Iran wants to make a deal.
Right.
But you mentioned the moving of military assets, right? He has already got one carrier, I believe, in place,
Right.
another one headed there as well. Does this look to you like a path of de-escalation or escalation or intimidation?
It definitely looks like ramping up the pressure for any sort of negotiations. Does it mean that that President Trump wants the negotiations to succeed, or whether he ultimately does want just the Iranians to sort of back down and not meet their terms, and then that leads into a military attack that would look more justified to the rest of the world? That remains to be seen. But yeah, definitely having two aircraft carriers in the region, I mean, that's sending probably the strongest message the U.S. military could make in being in the region and carrying that out.
We've been talking about what Iranians want, and by the Iranians we mean the government so far, because they're the ones that are a part of this negotiation, right. But there are the people and how they feel as well. The President Trump has said that he thinks that regime change in Tehran may be the best thing that can happen. What are you hearing from your sources on the ground as to what Iranians on the ground want, civilians?
That is what he said last week. Last Friday, Trump said that regime change may be the best outcome, may be the best choice, and it was,
that doesn't sound to me like de-escalatory.
It is not. And, definitely for him to come out and say that publicly, I think was a bit shocking to hear. And regardless in what context he meant it, maybe he meant it just, again, as an additional pressure tool on the Iranians for negotiations or to come to some kind of deal. Remains to be seen. But yeah, I am hearing from people inside Iran that they do want the U.S. to act. Ordinary Iranians don't want to be pulled into another war. There were something like 1,000 civilian casualties during the conflict, the 12-day war with Israel last summer, which the U.S. took part in, primarily just to hit the nuclear facilities. They don't want war, but at the same time, they've got a government that in the recent protests and the crackdown that followed, something around 7,000 people were killed within a very short period of time, within a 48-hour time period. So when they see, at least those people who are against the government and want it to change, when they see that kind of violence being carried out against them, they see a foreign intervention really as the only way to pull themselves out.
What I've been hearing from folks on the ground is anything is better than this.
Essentially, yes.
Because I asked them, what about the day after? What then? And even if the day after feels unknown and scary, they tell me anything is better than this.
Absolutely, exactly. That what could be worse? What could be worse than what we just went through? That whatever chaos may follow a military attack, that is, we're willing to tolerate that, but not more of this killing on the streets.
Babak, thank you.
Thank you.
In China, hundreds of millions of people are on the move, visiting loved ones for Lunar New Year. For the uninitiated, this holiday is basically like Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas all combined, with consumers dropping somewhere north of $140 billion on travel, on retail gifts, and the like. Chinese officials, they're hoping this spending will boost consumption in an economic slump. So for that, I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Frere, who is based for us in Beijing, and she's joining us now. Hi, Janice.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It is the year of the horse, which symbolizes strength, speed, and freedom. But a crying horse, it seems, has become an unlikely mascot. What's going on here?
So the cry horse was born of a mistake. What happened was there was a store in southern China who ordered these plush toys because every year there's a different animal, and they roll out all of these plush toys as mascots for for the coming New Year. Usually they're smiling, but some guy in a factory mistakenly sewed all of the faces upside down and produced.
And for those that are listening and not watching, Janice is currently holding up the Cry Cry horse with a sad face.
A very
frowny
sad face. But a face that went viral. And this horse has become a symbol for this generation of young office workers, the 996 crowd, working from 9 till 9, 6 days a week, and stagnant pay and feeling like life isn't going anywhere. And so this little horse has become a totem for this generation because of what it says about how people feel right now.
I got to say, I think I got to get my hands on one of those Cry Cry horses because it turns out not just Chinese feeling this way, but a lot of Americans are feeling that way as well. But I know that you are kind of alluding to the economic crisis that the Chinese are facing right now. Part of what officials there are hoping is the Chinese New Year is going to kind of spurn the economy, right? Throw some money back into the economy that has been struggling. I know there's been a 5-year real estate crisis as well. What are the early numbers showing so far when it comes to retail, when it comes to shopping, and what are companies doing to help get people out there?
Well, Chinese officials would take exception with using the word crisis. There is an official belief that it just all relies on consumer spending, that consumption needs to be boosted, that, as part of this shift that's underway in China's economy, that it's no longer the manufacturing hub, the factory to the world, it's an AI country, it's a robotics country, and so they want people to buy into that. In terms of having those intentions and those ambitions translate to actual numbers has been proving a lot more difficult. Instead of going out and spending, as the government would like people to do, people are saving. They're buying gold. They're trying to prepare for even more uncertainty. They've been burned in the property crisis. Youth unemployment is at a high. There's a rise in unemployment among middle-aged professionals, which is something the past generation didn't experience. So there is a lot of anxiety. How that's supposed to play out over the holidays is that the government wants people to spend. They want them to spend on trips. They're saying there's an estimated 9.5 billion trips that are going to happen over this 40-day travel period. All of the platforms are offering specials. They're offering hongbao, the red envelopes with little bits of money to try to incentivize people to buy. There's been this Super Bowl war of all of these AI models like DeepSeek and others that are advertising to people, trying to get them to sign up to subscribe. They're offering free bubble tea. They're offering salads. They're offering anything they can to try to get people spending. The government is hoping that this will be a time that people feel good, going into the new year. They're with their families. They're talking about all of these different products, these AI models, that sort of thing. And that at the end of it, China's economy will benefit from it.
How does the United States play into all of this, considering the fact, of course, that there was the U.S.-China trade war, which was and is ongoing? Does any of this kind of present even greater obstacles to getting China's economy back on the tracks?
I think the shift that's been underway with the U.S. over the past couple of years, as countries have been de-risking from China, which is the term that we've heard used often, China, too, had been focusing on what they call self-reliance. U.S. export controls have had a bigger impact on China than, say, tariffs. Because
interesting.
Where China has been able to grow over decades by selling into the U.S. market, there's the acknowledgement here that era is over. But there's still a reliance on things that China wants that it hasn't quite yet been able to perfect. Things like, advanced semiconductors, AI and robotics, financial system. So there's still a reliance per se on the U.S. in that regard. But in other respects, China has been de-risking from the U.S. in the same way that the U.S. has been trying to lessen its reliance on China's supply chain. The risk for China is that the U.S. will rupture the relationship. So it doesn't need the best relationship, but it needs a lasting relationship because the U.S. can pose a downside risk to China.
So within that vein, and you're talking about how China is kind of forging new relationships as well, not needing the U.S. as much, we have seen British Prime Minister Keir Starmer visiting China. We have seen Prime Minister Mark Carney from Canada visiting China as well. The Year of the Horse is all about momentum. Could these types of relationships, these types of agreements help turn the economy there around?
The common factor of the revolving door of world leaders that has been coming through here since December, because there's been the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, Finland, South Korea, Germany coming at the end of the month. These are all U.S. allies. And these are all U.S. allies who 1 year ago were agreeing and saying, yes, we need to de-risk our countries from China. And now these are all the same countries that are turning towards China because there's less of a concern about China than there is about relations with the U.S. And it's not that there are huge deals coming out of these visits, but for China, the symbolism of having all of these world leaders, all U.S. allies, coming across the red carpet here, that was the win for China.
Janice Mackey-Frere, Happy New Year to you and to
Happy New Year.
The Crying Horse.
It's a vibe. It's a vibe.
Okay, that is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Inside Scoop. It is a deeper dive on the main stories of the day that comes out every weeknight straight to your inbox. You can sign up for The Inside Scoop as part of our paid subscription at NBCnews.com. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.